Oh, there we
And
go. We're live.
uh, as soon as this, it says setting up the meeting, and as soon as this gets a link, we'll post that link.
Awesome.
It's
Um,
This
going.
is legitimate.
is it okay? Fantastic. Let me perfect.
Everybody tweet.
Yeah,
Yeah, everybody put this out on the on your Twitter page.
I will. I will. You have to like send it to me so I know what to
We're
do.
live. Here we go. Here's the link.
I'll just retweet you. Why don't you
Oh
just do
yeah,
it and I'll
that
retweet you?
works. That works.
So,
So,
Gilded
so
Age Live Part
Gilded
Two.
Age Live Part Two. Yeah, I'm enjoying this. I have to say, it's a good medium where we get to field questions and whatnot from people. Today's episode, we are talking to Lindsey Boylan, who ran against Jerry Nadler this year unsuccessfully, but hopefully we'll see more in the
Yes,
future
yes.
from you.
You're not
And
getting rid of me yet.
fantastic. And today we're talking about retributive politics, specifically in regards to a tweet from President-elect Joe Biden, where Biden said, he tweeted, "My dad used to say, Joey, I don't expect the government to solve my problems, but I expect it to understand my problems. Folks out there aren't looking for a handout. They just need help. They're in trouble through no fault of their own, and they need us to understand." Initial reactions?
I mean, I have a story about my mom, growing up as a 16-year-old single mother on welfare, having my sister and being endlessly ashamed and embarrassed about the whole experience, in spite of that fact that she, worked a full-time job, still didn't get paid enough to make a living wage, and was endlessly ridiculed for being a young mother, for being a mother on food stamps and all these things. And I think my initial reaction was, this is the exact wrong message. This is the wrong tone. This is not bringing people in. It's alienated people deeply who are experiencing pain, an entire progressive community, but a lot more than that, people who don't even engage in politics. And then on a personal level, I slept on it and I woke up more pissed because the stories that I've experienced, and I've come a long way and gained a lot of privilege, are totally different than the stories Joe's dad told him. And I think that's incredibly connected to whose voice has been heard and what our government has done, both under Republicans and Democrats. And this is such an indicator to me that we may be seeing a lot more early 90s Democratic Party, or worse, Reaganomics. All of it sounded like a lot of that. I mean, a nicer way to say really depressing things about what Americans are and what they need. And it really pissed me off. So, I mean, it should be a conversation and not just me talking at you. So I'm
No, 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 no,
sorry.
no, no. Look. It's important to give everybody their initial take. Put it out there, lay it all out. Alex,
It's out
what
there.
about you? What's your initial take on this?
Well, Joe Biden's won the election.
So you
It's
agree
abundant.
100%? Cool, good. No, I'm sorry.
That's it. Yeah, look, he's the president. So now that he's the president, everything's fine.
Yeah, stop helping
Um,
Republicans.
Although Walker, I was trying to go to brunch today, and you scheduled this, so I didn't get to go to brunch.
I
But no, like what I
You
say.
didn't
So he
invite
has
me.
been elected. I mean, who knows? Because it didn't happen. But the point is, he's not trying to get votes anymore. He's going to be sworn in.
Yeah.
Even the Republicans in Georgia are telling him to screw off. So basically, this is him, and he's not pandering to Republicans to try to get their votes. This is who he is. And as you said, Lindsey, in the early 90s, Joe Biden was a middle-aged man. He was already a seasoned politician with a couple decades in the Senate already. So, give or take a few years. So, I mean, this is a 78-year-old guy now. He's not going to change. And as we've seen with the cabinet appointments and things like that,
Yeah.
his nominations, I should say, there's not a single progressive in a leadership position.
Mira.
There's not a single progressive in a leadership position. You have one or two of the economic advisors are seen as progressives, but they're not leaders. They're not going to be heads of departments or agencies, or even the head of the economic council. So listen, I mean, like, it's pretty obvious where this is going. It's not surprising. But I think that, in terms of my actual take on this, I mean, I think it's not only bad politics to say this at this point to your base, but it's also bad economic policy. I mean, the best stimulus you can do during a pandemic when people are supposed to stay home, and we've said this before in Gilded Age a bunch of times, but give people money to stay home. And the other thing is, it's just good economic stimulus, period. Because when you give low-income people money, that money is going to go directly into the economy that is floundering currently. It's not going to be invested. It's not going to go offshore. It's not going to sit in a savings account. It will go directly into
which
the
in a
economy.
way
That
is
the
fucked
best
up
stimulus.
if you think about it,
Well, yeah, they're going to, because they don't have enough disposable income, so they need it. People need it. I mean, like, so that's what I'm saying. It's bad politics and it's bad policy. So I don't really understand the point of him going and just saying that. But that's just
I mean, I think the
Joe
worst
Biden.
part of it is this, they didn't even, his team probably thought this was a slam dunk. I'm almost as frustrated at the people who surround him. I'm not sure the man even does the Twitter thing himself. And it wasn't just the video and the narrative. It was the language chosen with it. And this isn't a small thing, because it's showing us what our future leader thinks is going to bring people together or bring some people in. This was a bring in the tent moment. And, yes, I live in New York City. I live in Manhattan. I've got a lot of privilege and opportunity, and I understand that. And so do I know what every single quote unquote Trump voter is thinking about? No. But in my experience of phone banking, or my experience with my own family members in various levels of alienation at this point, and what motivates them, like, including the word handout, if anything, if that hits anyone, it's going to hit them. That is going to be the message. They heard the word handout, and that is the message. Not as if, oh, listen, we need to help people in pain. I mean, I don't understand what the point of any of it was. If it was to show a real acknowledgement of people's pain, I think it really did the opposite. And the biggest fear I have about one of the biggest fears I have about this moment in time is we're not even seeing the people who are suffering the most. The loudest voices are in many cases people who have some kind of power, who have some kind of access to saying something about what they're suffering through. We're not even seeing the extent of it. I think this is worse than, people talk in the 70s and the 80s in terms of the Financial Oversight Board in New York City. I think it's much more systemic than that. People talking about a recession, it's a depression. And the idea that this is what his team is bringing out of the cavern to, move forward is just totally insufficient to me. To me, it seems as though he has a lack of recognition of where we are in this moment. And maybe it's not him at all, but the team is who's going to be running the White House. And we're not in, someone said, oh, Obama did the same thing. Well, we're not in the Obama era. We're in a different time. That if the West Wing premiered this in this moment in time, I think very few people would be responsive to it.
And also the Obama thing, the Obama said the same thing. That's the fucking problem. You had 3 years, within 3 years of the worst financial meltdown since the Great Depression, you had a push for deficit reduction. And these guys are going to means test themselves into irrelevance. This is the part that really aggravates me. It's like you're treating basic things that our government should be providing: healthcare, housing, food, basic income, internet. Even.
Yes.
I mean, we had problems
very much internet right now.
Remote learning,
yes.
Like internet, all of these basic things, they're not handouts. They are basic services. It's modernity. It's
the expectation you should have of your government.
Yeah, it's dignity.
Yeah.
It is a dignified life.
Yes.
Sadly, that's the rift within within and without the Democratic Party. I mean, it's a fundamental ideological difference. Do we deserve healthcare without cost? Do we deserve
the answer to all of these things, by the way, the simple answer, and I think that it's very hard to deny this in the face of this pandemic, the simple answer is yes. All of these things we should be providing, because if we did, we wouldn't have a situation like we have now, where 270 plus thousand people are dead, and millions of people are being forced back into offices, and millions of people have lost their jobs and their healthcare. This is a catastrophe at every level. And for Biden to talk about handouts as in any way related to his response to that, for me is just like, dude, fuck off. And I know I'm not supposed to say that as a journalist, but fuck off.
I swear off a fair amount. I swear a fair amount, as you know. I think that's the exact right reaction. And it's shocking to me how disconnected the people who we just elected to do something better than the guy who's been there for something better, how disconnected they are from reality. That's what it really feels like. It feels like that message was a script from West Wing in the early 90s, and we are in dystopia time, and they're still giving me their CD from like their album from the early 90s. And I just want to, it makes when you see people in pain, if you know them or you don't, you're like, how can this be how you're approaching these problems? How can this be? Rhetoric matters. It really does. I mean, ugly rhetoric is in part what has made Donald Trump powerful in a part of this country, and his ability to access that. Rhetoric really matters. And to start off by some sort of more polite welfare queen refrain, which is what I heard.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Is grotesque, and it is a concern I have had, and I think a lot of us progressives have had, about the whole party leadership, not just in terms of values, but in ability to deal with these really systemic problems of our day, and inequality and climate change and systemic racism and all of it. He's coming at it with the playbook from a different era. And we told him not to do this in the election cycle by supporting candidates who are much more progressive. And we reminded him not to do this. This is a message his team has heard throughout this period of time.
And that
is what's so frustrating. Yeah, this is not new. And then you get people saying, oh, Lindsey, or oh, Walker, or Alex, give him a chance. No, like if we're thinking about what's happening to Americans, you said almost 300,000 Americans died, countless number of New Yorkers, seniors, people are going hungry. Millions have been thrust into poverty. Over almost 1 million women left the workforce in September alone, all because of caregiving issues, in my understanding. Like that, I am giving him a chance to do his job. That's what
it disproportionately impacts women. It disproportionately impacts communities of color, particularly the Black community and Native Americans. It is hurting the people who are most vulnerable the most. And for assistance to be put in a basket the labeled handout, or like, they're not, or even just vilifying, like, these people aren't looking for a handout, they're in trouble, and and government should understand that, but not necessarily solve problems. Like, that is the role of government. The first job of government is providing for the general welfare and common defense. And
so
Alex.
Totally agreed. But first of all, in terms of the giving Biden a chance thing, people gave Obama a chance, and very little got accomplished over 8 years. And especially in those first 2 years, we had a watered down Healthcare Act. That was about it. So progressives, including people like Jeff Hauser at the Revolving Door Project, groups like Demand Progress, Sunrise Movement, they're actually questioning and really meticulously researching his potential cabinet picks and his advisors, unlike what people did in 2008. So this is just to say that, like, when people are critiquing Biden, whether it's on his messaging or it's on his picks, like, that's very important. That's something that didn't happen in 2008 and 2009. And so, because people were just, oh wow, this is a new guy, he seems really great, and he's not George Bush. But the other thing is that, I'm glad, Lindsey, you referenced a Republican campaign ad, the welfare queen. I guess that was for probably under H.W. Bush, right? One of their things. So this really is, it's not just bad policy and sort of the wrong message. It's Republican talking points.
Yes.
Basically, there's very little difference between saying people don't want to hand out during a pandemic and saying there's givers and takers. There's 47% of Americans.
The makers and the takers, baby.
Exactly.
Really,
exactly.
the makers, the people in the other side of that equation, the so-called makers, are often the ones, first of all, who are
taking the most
super PACs on both sides of the aisle. But they're the ones who are evading taxes. They're the ones not paying the taxes. They're the ones making passive income, just sitting around.
And underpaying their workers, like Walmart directing their workers onto government assistance. Like who's really the maker and the taker in that situation? They are the ones who are. And look, I think the really frustrating part, like another really frustrating part of this, is that we never question when corporations need a bailout. When there's a big need on Wall Street, or there's a big need, Boeing needs X amount of billions to save itself. We never question it. Even as they take that money and throw it into stock buybacks, we don't question it. That's their decision. No rainy day fund, not a problem. We got you the next time. But when it's people, when people are like, we need money so that we can afford rent, we don't have to choose between electricity and groceries. That stuff, well, we got to make sure that you really need it. Like, how do we define need in this country? And like, it is so staggering to me and so offensive. I saw it, and that's why we had to do this video.
I know. It's just, there's so much I have to say about what you and Alex are saying. There's a million things to say. I just keep going to the fact that the pandemic highlights all of the inequalities that we've been dealing with. And it also follows a huge progressive movement that has been challenging Democrats to be better about who they help and how they help, specifically helping people and focusing resources on people rather than all of these conversations around, debt levels, all these conversations around the stock market, the whole narrative of what has been the Democratic Party of constricting and confining the social safety net, which Bill Clinton was the king of, right? So this is not new. And then we find ourselves here, and Joe Biden has said the same things. And I think a good friend of mine from Twitter, Corey Johnson, he said something about how it places people in no fault of their own. That is of has no relevance.
Right.
Especially in these times. We're talking about major restorative justice moves. We're talking about a criminal justice system that has been unfair from the beginning. We're talking about a housing system that has been built on government-funded middle-class building of white families in Levittown and across the country. I mean, this is something I learned about in urban planning in my early career. And yet we're still using the narrative of fault that is so fraught with all of the winners and losers that we ourselves have created as a government in this country on the backs of the financial crisis, which this is all connected, right? People don't know how exactly they were fucked over, to your point, Walker, but they know they were. They know that they were because they lost all of the value of, their retirement or in their homes. They lost their jobs. Their jobs have become less secure. But somehow, through all this, through the increased speculation of the stock market, everyone who was on Wall Street got bailed out. And we haven't had any response to that. And this moment was a chance to take what progressives have been saying for several years now in the presidential election and doing something different about the reality we find ourselves in. And this verbal, like nothing burger, if you can be that fair about it, is what we got back. That is the best thinking of his team. And that is just endlessly frustrating.
The idea that people have to be worthy to have things like healthcare or housing is just insane to me.
It's so wrong.
It is so wrong. It's offensively wrong. And so one of the people in our comments, Amplifier Project, asks, how can we make the people who are suffering be seen? Mainstream media is not showing us these realities.
True.
It is true. And I think one of the ways is just talking about, using our platforms to to highlight those stories. And so I wanted to just read a few that were sent to me yesterday, or I shouldn't, or 2 days ago. Because I think it's important when we talk in the context of this conversation about people not wanting a handout. So here's Carlos said, lost a full-time opportunity in IT and have been furloughed, albeit taking online classes and staying with the family ever since. Applications turning up empty, etc. It sucks, but it was completely out of my control. Not a clue what my professional life looks like in the next year. Somebody else says, here in Massachusetts, parents who have a child in foster care are unable to get visits and see their child, sometimes limited to 1 hour a month. Parents aren't able to access the courts to file motions. It's a big problem. Somebody else said, having to go to work and routinely be in contact with people who have tested positive for COVID. Wondering if I'm eventually going to get sick. Like this is an abomination.
Heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
It's just insane. I mean, and it's.
I'll read something.
Yeah, please.
And this relates to a story that Walker did for the Daily Poster about the Shinnecock Nation which is outside of Southampton. And it's a great story. We'll put it in the notes here on YouTube. So I read it on Thanksgiving Day and was inspired. But they're fighting for their sacred land and for their economic rights to put up billboards on the highway next to their nation. But they do have a GoFundMe, and it's called the Shinnecock Nation COVID-19 Relief Fund. And since Thanksgiving, I think they've raised over $3,000. So that's good news. It's going north. But the point is, there's an update on December 1st, and the organizer Tella Trogue wrote this. Thank you to everyone who's contributed in the 9 months since this fundraiser started. The pandemic has remained a challenge in all of our lives. In our entire region, not just the Shinnecock, we're facing widespread food insecurity and a housing crisis, including homelessness. And so they're saying any contributions to this fund is going directly towards COVID-19 supplies like masks, gloves, cleaning supplies, paper towels, toilet paper, diapers, personal goods, and food in bulk to distribute to tribal members. I mean, this is an extremely poor community of indigenous people who are facing homelessness during the winter, during a pandemic. They literally are seeking money for paper goods, masks, gloves. I mean those are people who need help. And the idea that it's not their fault, like they're not looking for a handout. No, like they've been wronged by society and they need our help. And they frankly, I mean, we are the ones who have to help because the government treats them like shit, as they have for hundreds of years. We should
reframe this discussion from help. People need help to people need government. They need their government because that, at least that framing acknowledges something that is very, I think, essential to this discussion, which is that government has the role of government is to do these things. And by not doing these things, it is failing. It is failing the people.
And just to say, it's a little different with a Native American nation because they are their own government. So what they need is just more reparations and support from our government after the damages that we've done. But the conversation is the same. Is the residents of this area need more need resources that they don't have because of our crappy systems. So.
And I think before, I mean, so much, I don't think this is new news. I think we all talk about this in different ways, that our government systems and our social safety net has been set up to fail. I mean, you just look at NYCHA in New York City, you build it and then you leave it and walk away for, 5 decades. And then you blame the people who live there. Or, you have a disability social safety net that requires people to live in poverty. I mean, any of these things we basically create to fail. But one thing that I've heard a lot in, recent years was this idea, and I heard it a lot, when I was in business school at Columbia and the like, that technology was going to save us and that these brilliant, unicorns were going to solve every problem. And, I was working in urban planning in my 20s, and Mark Zuckerberg came to, I think it was Newark, and was like being contemplated as saving Newark. And meanwhile, we were doing simple stuff like street sweeping and sanitation and the basics that you're talking about, Walker, just like basic things that are supposed to happen that you're not supposed to be forced to think about because your government is supposed to work for you. Meanwhile, we have kind of moved to a whole model where we've been intentionally taught that government just doesn't work. So you got to find another solution, and almost anything is better. And now we have all of these powerful players that are winning the benefits of that. I mean, I would think even the logistics system of Amazon is very much the same way. And I think that's also part of this conversation too. Making government fail and look like it can't work and that it is the problem is a specific political strategy. And it pisses me off that our own leaders, who are supposed to be the most brilliant minds leading this party, feed into that narrative without even realizing it, which is what he's doing. To your, like, kind of respond to what you're saying, Walker.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Biden really is a 1990s neoliberal Republican / Democrat. Like, there is no, like, a very blurred line between partisan affiliate. At that point, I don't think partisanship really matters. And it's just coming. It's so obvious. Like, I feel like every day we're learning a little more that he's just completely not up for this. And he wasn't. And it was obvious during the primary. And I think that's something that Democrats are going to have to grapple with. That once again they sort of missed an opportunity, and unfortunately, it looks like they're going to pay for it, and the country's going to pay for it. Which like there is this retributive streak. The whole point of today's episode is talking about this sort of retributive streak that exists in American politics, and it exists on the right very explicitly, but it also exists on the left, or not the left, the left of center
party.
Like liberalism has a retributive streak that is very troubling. It's like, well, we still don't want to reward those who are unworthy of our assistance, or who are below our compassion. And I challenge people watching this to really open their minds to the idea that maybe nobody is below your compassion, that and shouldn't be, that there shouldn't be anybody below it, because we are only as safe as our least protected person.
And I think another great example of that is the homelessness crisis in New York. I absolutely believe that on the whole, homelessness is truly a policy choice, and it's a combination of bad policies in mental health. And when we deinstitutionalized, we didn't replace the mental health care system with any kind of infrastructure to help people, outpatient or anything. I mean, it's truly so nascent in terms of what we need to do in mental health. Our housing system, even our voucher program, our shelter system are set up to fail and to force people to prefer to be on the streets from a safety standpoint.
Yep.
And all of, I see it in so many different ways. And I agree wholeheartedly with people that it is not good for a community to have a lot of people experiencing homelessness. To your point, the way to deal with that is there's a clear set of policy objectives around housing, around mental health, around community organization support, all of these things that we're not doing. And that's why it's so heartbreaking to see someone like Joe Biden get out there and kind of completely miss the mark when there is such an opportunity to be doing more, especially when we talk about mental health. I mean, I think we're all around the same age. I think this is a generation where there's so much more opportunity to be real, to speak about real problems, and move away from the ridiculous idea that we need to present a perfect front. And this whole I didn't do anything wrong, but I still want help, and I want to be a big man, or that's what I hear in all this. And it's just such an unfortunate thing, especially for a generation that's grown up kind of I didn't even realize the water that I was swimming in until I became an adult, and no longer agreed with the outcomes of the Neera Tandons of the world. And I also just do want to say, having been in state government, having been the job secretary for the state, I know who has the most finite power in a state or a federal government, and running the OMB, running the budget process, being the gatekeeper is probably, the most important of roles. And I think there were a lot of ways to signal very differently about, not to progressives, to people who need help in this country. Like, forget talking to the left or progressives, just talk about how you're going to help the country, not sort of excise your way through the problem, which is what Neera Tanden's literal experiences in federal government, working in the Clinton era primarily.
So Kurt asks, going off a tweet from Ben Spielberg, why do y'all think Speaker Pelosi isn't drafting a standalone universal cash payment bill to quickly pass in the House?
So I haven't been following too closely, but what I did read, I believe that allegedly the payments, the cash payment, which actually Biden did say it would be better if it had the $1,200 to have another repeat of the $1,200 one time, I believe, but it's better than nothing. I believe the line is that would derail the big bill. So maybe that's why Spielberg is asking, because the Republicans don't want it. So why don't they do a standalone? I don't know. I don't see why not. I mean, she should have been doing standalone bills since March. Just signaling to everyone, to voters, again, this is before the election, saying, hey, we passed this standalone bill. Mitch won't put it on the floor. The Republicans are blocking your aid. And I don't know why not. And she still won't do it. So especially if putting it into the big bill, the compromise bill that will pass, if that's an obstacle, then just do it. I don't see why not.
It seems to me the most obvious thing in the world. Like, get people direct payments right now. A simple, clean bill, and put it on McConnell and make him explain why not. Like, where's the, why? That to me makes political sense, because then people are like, oh, that's direct money to me. That's easy for me to translate into a tangible benefit to my life.
And Biden might call it a handout, but he'll still support it, because he said the other day we should have that. So okay,
I mean, $1,200 isn't even enough. But and I was really interested in this because the bottleneck it took, even in New York alone, to get people their unemployment checks, given the level of independent contractors or the gig economy that we have all of these logistical operational challenges with even getting people the emergency unemployment that they needed. And we have all these logistical challenges for having assistance reach the small businesses. So the best way to deal across the board with that is absolutely to give people checks. That is the fastest way to to tourniquet the problem when we have a challenge of actually reaching the people who need it the most, and the other avenues that we've tried. And it's just, I can't speak for Nancy Pelosi, because I really don't think that she should be speaker. I don't think she should run again. I think that someone should be brave and courageous and challenge her. It just shouldn't happen.
It's just crazy to me that in 2018, it was the cool thing to do when you're running for a House to say, I will oppose Pelosi as speaker for another term. I mean, that was what everyone was doing. And allegedly, she sort of gave permission to incumbents to even do that, because she was like, oh, well, it's probably, if it's good for your campaign, sure, you can rage against me. It doesn't matter. I'm going to win. It's fine. And I believe that they put the left couldn't really figure out someone to put up. But the more even more conservative Democrats in the House did find someone. I forget who it was. It might have been Tim Ryan or one of those guys. And they didn't do that well. But I mean, look, I give them credit for at least trying, putting someone up there to combat Pelosi, even though they would have been more conservative probably than Pelosi. I respect them for trying. And this time around, everyone was like so focused on, I think, on the top of the ticket, they were, for Trump to lose, that they didn't really have time to mobilize. And I think it's the same thing. I mean, you've done it, Lindsey. You ran against an entrenched incumbent, someone very difficult to beat, but he had to actually work. He had to do something. He had to do a debate. He had to spend a little more time raising money. If Pelosi has to have a challenge every time, if she expects that challenge, she might try a little harder. And I think it's really a shame
she
that
shouldn't be speaker.
I mean, how do we get so far from humility that people don't realize when there's an opportunity to give someone else the microphone. I really, I tell my husband this all the time, when I get to a position of power, like, wrote me off the stage when it's time for me to be, when others can speak more cogently about the problems we're facing and how to deal with them and relate to people better, then it's your time to pass the torch.
Yeah, and if you're 80 years old and you're worth $114 million, you probably shouldn't be leading no matter who else is next. You probably shouldn't be in charge of the entire U.S.
I mean,
House.
the whole thing is like, it's just, it kind of reminds me of like a reunion tour for a band that is like way too old and no longer has the edge. Like, maybe, like, I don't know. I'm gonna piss somebody off if I name a band, but
you will invariably, but go for it.
But my impulse is to be like, this is like a Rolling Stones reunion tour, like, or like, okay, wait, what if I said like Kiss or something? Like,
there you go.
Some band that used to be like edgy and all of this this sort of new energy around it, and now today is just like old hat, like. And like they were getting the old Obama gang back together. Oh, we're gonna bring hope and change back into DC through market approved means, and like just stop, please pass. As who was it that said pass the torch? They were right. Pass the torch.
Yeah, I think that was that Julian Castro, and then as a result, he didn't get invited to the DNC during Joe Biden's speech. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of maliciousness.
He's not going to be part of the administration either.
No. And by the way, he's one of the I think the next generation's bright lights, personally.
Swalwell.
In my view.
It was Swalwell.
Oh, Swalwell. Yes, it was.
All right.
Swalwell.
Yeah, he was doing like the Joe Kennedy argument.
Yeah.
I'm just younger, so you should give me the torch because I'm just younger.
Yeah.
That was all he had. Whereas there are a lot of people of his age around. I think he's probably around 40-ish, 40, early 40. Yeah, who are who have actually cool ideas and want to change the system. But I think, I mean, I sure hope that in 2022, I mean, Pelosi has said at one point that this is going to be her last term as speaker. I don't necessarily believe it. I mean, Dianne Feinstein's like 86, 87, and she just got reelected to a 6-year term. I think power is really corrupting. So there's that. But true. But either way, I think that the handful of real leftists in Congress should really be planning a major challenge to Pelosi speakership in 2 years.
I just think it's so surreal that we're talking about like leftists as if this is some fringe reality and not a response to the reality of the world. I mean, I've always, I'm like not cool. I'm like super type A. I believed in, I interned on Capitol Hill. I would skip school to go to listen to congressional hearings. I'm a super nerd. And I have come to a huge awakening about our Democratic Party. And it's because it's not cutting it. And we're not even seeing people's problems and talking to those problems. And we're not reaching people, and we're not doing enough to help. We're repeating old records. And not that I'm not proudly a progressive or would consider myself a leftist, but this whole idea that it's some kind of like,
I know it's
like
a little
fringe movement is so wrong, especially when, we're talking about 40-year-olds getting into positions of power. But if you look what's coming down the timeline, my niece, the younger people that work for me don't want to have kids. They don't think the world is going to be around. They don't see a value in going to a 4-year college because it's too expensive and they don't think it'll help them. They're taking care of, my niece is taking care of my brother-in-law who's on disability. They're staying in their home. There's so much to be dispirited by in this moment in time. And if we can't get people like Nancy Pelosi to be humble about some Gen X and millennial people, they're missing the whole wave of pain that's coming that we should be confronting head on, especially around the environment and around inequality. I want to be on the right side of history, but I also just know it's coming.
Matt Stoller made this point that this gerontocracy just doesn't want to give up its like they won't even pass the torch to the next generation of centrists. Yeah. So like you have the Pete Buttigieg types who are patiently waiting in the wings for their time to come and extract as much wealth as they can from politics. But like they're not even being elevated by this party. And
I mean, we'll see. Biden might elevate him to
he might give him some position, but believe me, he'll be passed over.
But he's not a congressional leader yet.
For an older, more established statesman.
I mean,
like we have to break this. Like, look, at a certain point, we have to not be afraid to tell people, "You're too old. You need to retire. Your ideas."
I'm going to leave that to you and Alex, but you go do that.
Yes. No, but like we shouldn't be having these politicians who are held together by like glue and hair dye and disdain for working people. Like I said this the last time, but it's true. Like it's like, you know, they're like Frankenstein monsters at this point. Like just political animals that have crept out of the ooze that is DC politics, and they're like, we're never going to let go. People are dying because they fundamentally are detached from and don't have really any concern for the problems that people are facing. It is now December.
Hugging Lindsey Graham. Dianne Feinstein hugging Lindsey Graham after the Amy Coney Barrett hearings and saying that
this is great. Issue. This is but like
I think that's
December.
An era issue. That's someone. I don't. It's like there's age is one thing, and I'm kind of two minds about it. I think it's more about policy than age, and like, you know, Bernie Sanders is 78. He totally understands millennials and Gen X.
Absolutely. I love that guy.
He's great. Right. So like, it's not just about age, but I think like in a lot of cases, like you mentioned, Feinstein basically like endorsing the sham hearing for Coney Barrett by hugging Graham. I mean, that's her being like an artifact of a different era when like that kind of stuff. Like people did work together. Like there was, but Lindsey Graham used to be a pretty bipartisan guy until his mentor John McCain died. So I mean, like that's like it is an age thing because she comes from such a different era of the past that like she's mapping it onto the present. And someone like Biden is exactly the same era. Like that.
But even then, there's the age thing in that like solutions, big government solutions fell out of style in the 1980s. And so Pelosi comes from the Reagan era. Neera Tandem said that she was a fan of Reagan when she told her life story about how her mom was on welfare and then went and worked as a what was it, a travel agent for Raytheon, and then moved up through Raytheon, and then
look, they did it, so no one needs Medicare for all.
I think this is very funny because my father, after being a Marine, worked at Raytheon, and like I don't know where Neera and I went off in totally different directions in the world, but
well, it's nothing to do with working for Raytheon. A lot of people work for shitty companies, but it's that she was a fan of Reagan, and then Pelosi was like a big fan of Reagan, and Bill Clinton was a big fan of they all loved Ronald Reagan, probably the man most responsible for the decline that we are in today, the tailspin I think that we're in today is
that era Reagan. That I mean, you know, Nixon into Reagan, really, I mean that was us going away from FDR from the
but even Nixon gave us the EPA, like let's you know, like
Bureau of Land Management too.
Let's let the real small government like stuff, and Bill Clinton was really damaging. I mean, he really hurt the Democratic Party. And so we need politicians who can think outside of that narrow little time period. I mean, they're still, and you know, it's the Cold War, so you still get some of that with the Russia stuff. Like, it's all of it. You get the whole package. It's like, it's new again. We're back, baby. It's like, you're not. You're gonna relegate yourselves.
So let me take this. Well, go ahead, Lindsay.
No, go ahead, Alex. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, okay. I wanted to just transition because we're talking about new people in politics. You started a new campaign recently. You're running for Manhattan Borough President, right?
Yes. And I think, you know, people are like, what is that? How does it relate? Are you someone who just loves to run for office? And, you know, in general, one thing I was going to say earlier, especially if you want to kind of go by your own sense of ethics and what you think is right, it's definitely a Steve Prefontaine kind of fight, like where you're just sucking wind the whole time. And I just figure most of my career, I'm going to be sucking wind because if I stand behind the person who is the governor of my state in order to get where I'm going, I'm gonna continue to get a lot of like dirt on me that I don't want. And so you kind of have to go your own way. And the congressional race for me was, how do I help my community? I don't think the congressman, although he's not perceived as conservative, has done that much to actually help his community. And, you know, before this crisis, the level of rent burden, people who are so housing insecure in probably one of the wealthiest districts in the country, it was astronomical. And that's only gotten much worse now. The level of inequality in a district like that. And, you know, we didn't win, obviously. It would have been great to win. I spent some time this summer kind of just thinking, what do I want to do? Do I want to write? I don't really want to write about myself. It's a little exhausting to do that. I was walking around the city and I remembered my first decade in work, which was all about urban planning. So I was managing public parks, including Bryant Park, and you know, everything from horticulture to sanitation to public events and the like. And I just loved it. And I remembered how much the experience of having good quality public realm, public space contributes to livability and quality of life. And I know we're going into a time where we're going to have far fewer resources. Unfortunately, we're going to have a governor who's an austerity governor. We're likely to have a mayor who is some version of an austerity mayor. And we need someone who's going to say, I don't care what I'm working with. We're going to do more to deal with inequality, livability, and sustainability and resiliency around climate change. And so this job, Manhattan Borough President, is basically all that. It's around urban planning, land use, zoning, community boards, which sounds kind of wonky, and it is. But luckily for Manhattan, I'm a super nerd. I've always been that way. And the combination of being, you know, an urban planner and then spending the next decade in job creation, that's exactly what it needs. It needs someone who's going to be its advocate to fight with the governor, which I'm pretty sure, you know, I already do, to fight with the mayor if I need to, or be on the same side, to think bigger than one city council district. So my city council district is Corey Johnson's. It's one of the wealthiest in the city. I wouldn't want to be a city councilor to the district when we have a whole borough to think through. And frankly, if we help Manhattan, we're going to help the whole of New York City recover, which is what it's all about. It's not just our central business district, it's our cultural center, our historic center. The problems that happen if we go to catastrophic cuts within the MTA, the problems that happen if we don't figure out how to educate our kids in our public school system, all of these things are going to connect to land use, community boards, and zoning. And so that's why I'm running. And luckily, I chose an open seat this time. I've got some name recognition now. And I'm running against 3 dudes, 2 of whom I've gotten more votes than in Manhattan. So I'm hoping that all of our progressive friends find out about the race and help me, because it's not just a wonky role. It's about how do we help recovery? And frankly, how do we try and create new models for, like what you were saying earlier, Walker, about, you know, how do we make a different case about what the usefulness of government is and why it matters and who it should work for. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here.
So tell everybody where they can find you.
Lindsey for New York. They can find me on Twitter, which I'm usually giving an opinion and you guys see it, but Lindsey for New York is our website. And I would love and appreciate all the help, especially from New Yorkers, financial and volunteer, all of it. And, you know, our progressive family has gotten me really far thus far. And I'm just really, I'm humbled by it. I'm really appreciative of it. And I'm going to be sucking wind my whole career, Steve Prefontaine, you know, style, but that's how I want it to be. So that means I need help from people who believe in what I'm trying to do.
Fantastic.
Can I just ask one quick question, even though we're kind of wrapping it? You mentioned
God, Alex.
Sorry. Obviously, got to get this one in. Homelessness in New York obviously is a huge problem. I think something like 60,000 homeless families, probably more since that's
more than that.
Many more because of COVID-19.
Yes.
Does the Manhattan Borough President position offer opportunities, you know, to work to reform that system, to improve that system?
Huge. So even this controversy you've probably heard a lot about at the Lucerne on the Upper West Side of, you know, potentially moving 200 men from the Upper West Side hotel that they've been staying at to the financial district. That's basically been optically about issues around livability, but really has become very ugly and has become a battle over who can sort of say not in my community. the Manhattan Borough president would be at the center of that. So how do they force the mayor to not make short-sighted decisions that hurt communities or really only respond to the powerful communities, and instead have a broad vision of how the hell are we going to deal with the homelessness crisis? How are we going to deal with it in every community? What does that mean for increasing the value of housing vouchers so that they actually cover market rate, apartments? How do we get people in this time out of congregate shelters and somewhere much safer? How do we think about more programs that have been successful, like the Blueprint program that actually bases social services around people who need add-on wraparound services? How do we do all these things? And it's in many cases ends up being a lot about land use and zoning issues and the community board,
the fun stuff,
which is exactly what the Lucerne issue has been a very bad example of, because we didn't have a mayor who's on one level a good planner, brave, courageous leadership. And even aside from all that, the normative judgments, he just doesn't know how to approach an idea with a plan. And a lot of what we need is, what are our goals for housing? How do we eradicate homelessness? How do we provide more, not just affordable, but deeply affordable and workforce housing? And how does each community have a responsibility to that? And I think you'll also see that the resentment and tension around rezoning processes in the city is in many cases largely connected to, in what I view as the mayor's lack of vision around a lot of these things, and communicating that to people. So that's what this job is all about, Alex.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, especially because something that's aggravated me my whole adult life is that Democrats, when campaigning, hardly ever talk about the poor. It's all middle class, middle class, middle class. I was watching some Neera Tanden videos that Walker had bases reporting on middle class, middle class, middle class. Never talk about the poor. I don't know if Biden's going to mention the poor, but I think that honestly, that's good campaigning to me. If you're talking about the least served, population, the people who need the most, I guess instead of saying help, who need a better and bigger government. That's really important, because that's a whole group of voters that get totally ignored. And it's also just the most important because they're struggling.
It's the shame thing. It's that Lindsey was talking about earlier. That's
why it makes me so angry.
Yeah, that there's this shame attached to being poor, as though these folks aren't really worthy. Like the middle class, those people have made something of themselves. The hardest working people in this country are the working poor.
Yeah, it's hardest to be poor. It's the most expensive to be poor.
And frankly, economic contribution is not an indication of worth, whether or not you are worthy of basic human dignity. Like the whole conversation, just to bring us back to the start, the whole conversation is off, because we treat things that government should just be doing for everybody as rewards for those who are deemed worthy, and that is completely perverse. The last thing, Lavelle asks, why does Pelosi still want to be speaker? Oh, wait, sorry. I want to go to the question before that, which is, what's your reaction to the $900 billion stimulus bill? Stimulus in scare quotes. As everybody here knows, that comes with a temporary corporate liability shield, so that if you get sick on the job, you have no recourse. So my reaction is obviously, that's great. That's clearly the best thing we can do. But I would be curious to get your reactions to that before we wrap this up.
I mean, if I just keep going back to, when I was running for Congress, I was obviously watching a lot of the congressional hearings, the impeachment proceedings, all of these hearings pretty carefully. And I was struck not just by the inefficiencies, but the archaic nature of Congress and how out of touch. I mean, I don't always agree with everything Rashida Tlaib says. We find ourselves on a similar part of the party. But she was saying something about another member of a hearing, and they forced her to strike her comments from the record because it was too personal about another member. I mean, what a ridiculous system. We are not allowed to say anything. And this does have a point. so much of our congressional process needs to be revamped and modernized. I'm not all for like modernizing, like that's going to help everything, but it's so out of touch with the pain points of the American people that, like, to our point earlier, like, why haven't we just gone straight to an emergency UBI, I like to call it, or some version of that alone? It's because we've corrupted the system so much that it's so out of touch with how to actually help people, and that needs to be really changed. And that's why someone like Nancy can't stay in her position.
And Alex, I know that you're a big fan of corporate liability shields.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the thing is, you know, people have claimed that the reason why Pelosi rejected the $1.8 trillion possible deal, which was available several months ago, was because it included the corporate liability shield. And then now we have a bill that's half that, and it has the corporate liability shield in it. And she's promoting, I'm really happy with where we are. Biden won. Now we can do our relief.
You just don't understand the chess, Alex.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I don't, yeah.
And then critiquing members of the press for asking her that. Like,
yeah, she's getting really nasty with the press. Actually, that's kind of
very Trumpian, very, very disturbing.
It's just weird because we've had this president who calls us the enemies of the people and everything, and she can't take a couple reasonable questions without
those are reasonable questions. They're very reasonable
it's
questions.
weird. It's weird how defensive she is, and I think that
it's almost she just like she knows that she fucked up.
Well, but you're right. But she just won speaker again. She's going to be in the same party as the president. So kind of probably meaning maybe have slightly more power. Maybe she's just kind of high on herself. I don't know. But I mean, obviously 900 billion is not nearly enough, and 1.8 trillion wasn't nearly enough. But I have to, I hate to say it, but it's like people are so desperate. Like people need something, and I believe this bill has. I mean, it's literally going to be like a month or two of like $300 a week extra for.
It's like so sad. I mean,
it's not
so
much,
sad.
But it's like, okay, just give people something, because we got
to
make it through another month. But there's no eviction moratorium, and things like January 1. I mean, these evil landlords are going to be kicking millions of people out of their homes.
The only thing I would say on that, though, is like, I think it was Miles Howard. He brought up a good point about, and I feel this way, which is so much of why my ire and other people's and yours too, I bet, is focused at the state and local level. Like, there's the federal issue and we need the support, but things like the evictions moratorium, housing issues, there's also levers at the state and local level, which people need to be pushing now. And the fact that like we're still having a conversation in New York about taxing our wealthiest brackets more extensively, or that we're still contemplating carried interest loopholes, is just, it's really again, it's like that, like handout stuff. And it's no surprise to me that Biden and Cuomo are best friends. That's how I knew that he wasn't going to be some great guy.
Wealth will flee the state.
Very early. He was one of the first high-profile people to endorse Joe Biden. Like
Biden was at his state convention for re-election. They go way back. They're the best of friends.
It's just so ridiculous. I mean, we ask him because his
nothing will fundamentally change.
The New York State Legislature was trying to increase taxes on the wealthy, and Cuomo's response is, well, the wealth will flee the state. And as somebody who grew up in the Hamptons, I have to say that is a patently ridiculous.
Oh, it's a total lie. It's not borne out by evidence. People are not going to uproot their whole life. They're not going to just move. They're not going to move to another state because they have to pay slightly more in taxes. It's absurd. Right. Sometimes if you increase corporate taxes enough, it's really more about unionization. Like
that is a really undertaxed area, by the way. There is just so much wealth that is not being appropriately taxed.
Yes.
And it's all on Native American land. That's the other part of this that is really just obscene.
These individuals are not going to move. And by the way, it also goes the other way around. Like people were like, "Oh, you know, we kicked Amazon out. I mean, what's going to happen?" And then like Bezos buys a giant apartment in New York. It's just absurd. People live where they want to live. You know, especially
people live where they want to live, and
if they're really wealthy,
if anything, you know that. I know a bunch of people who left and either went to the Hamptons or they went upstate. A lot of people did not leave the state itself. And so that is the appropriate reason why taxes are left at state
Moving the
level,
second half.
adjudicated at the state level, and he should be doing that.
Well, it's status. They care more about status than the actual amount that they pay. You could charge the wealthy in this state 100% of their income, and they, obviously graduated. But there would be people who would be bragging about the fact that they pay 100% tax rate. That is what matters more than anything. It's legacy and status.
That's
And-
certainly the pied-à-terre tax stuff.
Yeah.
Like having a pied-à-terre in the city of New York for sure.
Yeah, why aren't we taxing vacant apartments? There are like 87,000 vacant apartments in New York City, at least as of a couple of years ago. I'm not sure what it's at now. I'm sure it's a lot more because
if you're on the west side of Manhattan where I live, during the middle of shelter in place, there were entire buildings that had no lights on. Entire buildings.
How many people are on the street today in New York? I mean, in 2018, it was like 3,500 on the street, and then 60,000.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean,
the
thing that scares me, over 100,000 students are homeless or experiencing, homeless housing insecurity in the shelter system. And that was before all this. So I think it's probably doubled.
Yeah.
This is a crisis of our own making, and it's one that we could fix overnight by just putting people in unoccupied.
And the point that you make, Lindsay, is very important. And I was saying this two days ago in our last video stream, is that we got a Biden administration coming in, like it's looking good. They're not going to make sweeping changes, right? There's going to be some minor improvements. I think it's not going to be enough. So the local and state level, but especially the local level, is really where change can happen the most quickly. And so, I mean, I'm guilty of as a journalist, mostly covering national, federal politics, and I want to get more into the state and local, because that really is so important. And we also have a dearth that local media is dying out, and so that's another.
Yes,
that's also really damaging.
I mean, Gotham Gazette this week was wondering if they could stay afloat, and that's been a good a government accountability group for a long time. Backed by Citizens Union. I used to be on their board before I went to work for the state. DNA Info, I recently unearthed an article where I was talking about Manhattan's best bathroom that I managed, and it was in DNA Info, and that's not even around anymore, right?
Yeah, that was killed by right-wing billionaire Joe Ricketts. That was complete union busting there. So I mean, the two go hand in hand. I think is like politics and media, right?
Yes.
The two need each other.
Yes.
And so that's a whole nother discussion. But I do think that it's important to emphasize how important local politics are.
So listen, I think we've kept Lindsay longer than I said we were going to.
Oh, it's dark. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys.
No, I apologize.
I need to take a stroll myself.
And I need to go to the grocery store.
I enjoyed this. It was thank you guys so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's fantastic. I hope you'll come on again. I hope
we will.
We didn't. I hope we weren't too abrasive for your campaign.
Are you kidding? No. Well, so my favorite thing to do is in another life I would have loved to have been a comedian, because I can say all the things that I think as a politician. So I go on with comedians all the time, and they're like, I hate that, but why'd you do that? So no, I'm very used to it. This is fun.
Just blame us. We're the ones who lack decorum. Not. Well,
notice when there's something I don't want to say, I'm just like. So but I enjoyed it. Thank you both so much.
And thank you
a lot.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, Alex. Here I am interrupting you all the time. You're so good to me.
Phrase. But keep us posted, Lindsay.
I will. Thank you both very much.
Thanks for coming on.
Awesome.
And thank you everybody for watching. We hope you'll tune in the next time we do one of these live shows. And now I'm going to end this and figure out how to end the stream sooner than I did last time.
I don't even know how to do any of it.
It's difficult. It's not as easy as you'd think. The last time I left, it accidentally thought it was streaming for 7 hours before I realized.
Oh wait, were you in your house? Who is that? Journalist?
Well, no. So thank God, no. And I have these
Jeffrey Toobin moment.
I have these little I have these camera covers. So I'm
gonna get one of those. I put a Hello Kitty Band-Aid for my daughter on mine, but it still freaks me out.
Everybody should get the camera covers. It's really scary. They can hack your phone and your computer, and it's anyway, yes. Take care, everybody.
Thank you guys.
And tune in next time.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.